This is a water fountain, and this is also a water fountain. A waiting room and another waiting room. Here's a shop front and another. All these pictures show the same thing, but they're separated by who can use them. These photos show segregation brought about in the late 1800s by what became known as Jim Crow laws. These were introduced in the southern states of America, which enforced racial segregation. Separate schools, transport, accommodation, even movie theatres. They lasted all the way up until 1964, when this guy, Lyndon B. Johnson, signed a monumental new law, the Civil Rights Act. Finally, segregation was abolished, preventing discrimination in public facilities, education, and employment. And, along with the 1965 Voting Act, it ensured all Americans got the vote. This win was a long time coming, a result of relentless protests and campaigns, taken part in by hundreds of thousands of Americans, and growing pressure from civil rights groups. But what if there was another factor which laid the groundwork for this win? A change that was occurring under the surface? Well, a bunch of economists thought they found just that. Take a look at this map. It shows the proportion of black Americans back in 1910. The darker the green on the map, the higher their percentage of the population. It's not hard to see where black Americans mostly lived, the southern states. But this was changing. Already by 1910, African Americans were moving out, in search of better opportunities up north, and away from the system of segregation. Whilst for much of the 1800s, around 90% of all African Americans lived in the South, by 1970 this has declined to little more than half.
More than 4 million black Americans left the US South between 1940 and 1970. So we're talking about a massive and transformative event.
That's economic historian Marco Tabellini, and he, along with his co-authors, Alvaro Calderon and Vasiliki Fouka, thought this massive movement up north, at the same time as huge progress in civil rights, might not be a coincidence.
We were not the first, of course, to come up with the idea that the civil rights movement and the African American migration were related, but we thought it was fascinating to try and investigate this long-standing hypothesis.
They thought that, with millions of new black migrants in the north, who now could vote freely, pressuring politicians and influencing other voters, this might have just been the catalyst for civil rights progress. And so they set about testing their hypothesis. To do this, at first they looked at the success of the Democratic Party in elections. See, while the party nationally supported segregation, that was not the case everywhere.
Locally in the north, it was actually Democratic legislators who were pushing civil rights bills. So we could take that to be a good proxy for support for civil rights.
The researchers looked at which areas African Americans moved into in the north and tracked how the vote changed. They found that just a 1 percentage point higher black population led to a 1.8 percentage point increase for the Democrats.
Places that received more black migrants as a proportion of their population in 1940 saw an increase in the vote share of the Democratic Party. This can be interpreted as more support for civil rights.
And this wasn't just black people moving in and voting Democrat.
This increase in the vote share of the Democratic Party cannot be explained by the voting behavior of either black migrants themselves alone or even black residents of the north that might have shifted to the Democratic Party.
To try and explain this, the researchers analysed a bunch of local newspapers from the time. They plotted this graph. Along the y-axis, the correlation between the increase in the black population and the number of times lynchings were mentioned in the newspapers of the county. And along the x-axis, the number of weeks before and after a lynching occurred. As you might expect, before, there's basically no correlation. But after a lynching occurred, the places with more black migrants saw it reported in their local papers much more.
We saw that when the lynchings in the South happened, there was an almost immediate pent-up discussion in the North, specifically in the places which had received more black migrants.
It seemed, just by having more African Americans in an area, this increased the wider awareness of their brutal treatment in the South. So, the Great Migration wasn't just about people moving north. It was a story of how their arrival helped shift the conscience of a nation and bring about one of the most transformative moments in American history. Thank you to Marco Tabellini and Vasiliki Fouka for their support as part of this project. Please watch further videos in our series delivered by Discover Economics and Cage Research Centre. Please visit our website and follow us on social media.